This is the Art of Darkness podcast with Kevin Kautzman
and Brad Kelly. We're a couple of very online writers interested in the dark side of what drives creative people to create against all odds.
This show is about art and the people who make it, what it costs them, and what it takes to bring something unique and impactful into the world.
Each episode, we excavate the life and work of an artist you might think you know.
Don't worry, they're all safely dead.
On every episode, we try and find out just what the hell was wrong with them and how they worked through their darkness to create something that lives on after them and continues to move culture.
Find us online at artofdarkpod.com and on Twitter at artofdarkpod.
Okay, and welcome back to Art of Darkness. This is a special Dark Room episode where we go back, we revisit an episode we've done before. We bring in some help to kind of talk about maybe what we got wrong, maybe dig into some stuff we didn't have time for, or we glossed over.
Yes, folks, it is so hard to find good help these days.
It is not, because we have two fabulous guests with us today. It's not that hard to find help. But before we get into that, I guess just general kind of like, support the show sort of thing. Of course, you can find us on Twitter at all times, 24/7. Hit me up on Twitter, Art of Dark Pod. What is the support, Kevin? Patreon.com/Art of Dark Pod.
That's it. That's where we ask for your support. You can also send us funny internet money at artofdarkpod.com/support. Please send everything to the moon. Beyond that, we also started a new Telegram channel, which you can get at t.me/artofdarkpod. We're starting to chat in there. So if you want to torture us online, that might be a better way to do it than Twitter.
Shouts out to the Telegram folks. It's kind of fun already. So we're spilling some secrets and pulling the curtain back a little bit on there. So that's kind of cool.
Sure.
So today we're going to talk shortly now after the Ulysses centenary. We are going to dig back into James Joyce, assisted by none other than Aldous Asterion, who was on the original episode for folks who haven't checked that out. The creator and mastermind behind Forest of Symbols. I suppose you'd call Forest of Symbols a podcast because you get it where you get podcasts, but I think of it as I don't even know what to call it, but he's the man, and Internet Joyce. We were laughing kind of beforehand, calling ourselves Joyce experts. I'm not a Joyce expert, that's for sure. I don't know if Aldous would consider himself one, but
no, just enthusiast. I guess.
Okay, there we go. Wow. We could be Joyce enthusiasts. That's okay. I think Joyce himself would sneer at expertise a little bit anyway, so it's probably all good.
Oh yeah. Oh, there are no experts.
That's right.
That's right. Over.
Yeah. Experts are over, folks. So
everybody listen to Forest of Symbols.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right. Please do listen to the Forest of Symbols. It's incredible. Recent episode. Go through the whole thing. It's fantastic. He's doing these wonderful intellectual inquiries, making connections between things that I wouldn't have even considered, and doing it in his well-read, dulcet tone. So it's a fantastic show. I can't recommend it enough.
I'm going to use the GRE word, erudite.
It is erudite.
Learned. Yeah. How often do I get to whip that one out?
Once a decade or so.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Now I've dipped into my GRE stash, and now it's over.
Now, we're also joined by friend of the show, Aaron Gwyn. Aaron Gwyn was with us when we talked about Faulkner, what feels like a long time ago now, but several months back we had a Faulkner episode. Aaron Gwyn is a acclaimed novelist, the author of several books, including Dog on the Cross, Wind's War, most recently All God's Children, which has officially been longlisted for the Dublin Literary Award. Is that right, Aaron?
Yeah, I think it used to be the Dublin Impact Award. Okay. Now it's the International Dublin Literary Award. I realized that there was a sort of Irish connection now because of this.
Well, congratulations on that.
Thank you, man. Thank you,
awesome.
Dude. Thank you.
It's a great
Appreciate
book.
It.
And everybody check it out. He's also a professor of teaches writing and literature at UNC Charlotte. So he's got some standing in this area, more than some. So between Kevin and I kind of picking our noses and staring at the wall, and these two guys, I think we're going to be able to get somewhere on Joyce.
Well, and to be clear, we do not hold his professor status against Aaron. Number one.
Thank goodness.
Yeah,
man.
right. Yeah. Number two, Aaron, you teach whole courses on Joyce. Is that correct?
I taught a Ulysses seminar a few years ago at the undergraduate level, which was interesting. Like they got way more than I thought they'd get. And so like the things that I expected them not to get, they got, and the things I thought, they'll totally get in on this. They weren't into that at all.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So well, this kind of ties into a kind of a question I've got here to ask you is like, I know why I want to read Ulysses, because I want to be erudite, right? And I love this kind of stuff, but why? And I'm asking this almost as a devil's advocate kind of thing. Aaron, why is James Joyce still relevant?
Well, I think it has to do first for technical and formal reasons. That'd be my answer. So technical and formal on one hand, and his influence on the artistic left on the other, which I would say political and social reasons. At one time, Joyce was the one of the banner men for the left in continental Europe, and then was one of the banner men and a representative of the avant-garde, not only in continental Europe but in the United States. You mentioned this on the original episode with Aldous. There was a time when owning a copy of Ulysses in America itself was a political act and serious tool credibility. So I think all of that.
This is why Marilyn Monroe wanted to be photographed holding it.
Absolutely,
right?
absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that's a hip thing to do, and it was originally a hip thing to do because it was a dirty thing to do and a banned thing to do. Right. Nothing draws eyes and ears and attention like banning something. And so the post office, the United States Post Office here in America, and then I believe a counterpart of it in Great Britain, or their version of it, seized the first shipments of Ulysses from Shakespeare and Company and destroyed them. And then people began to smuggle them into the United States, including Ernest Hemingway. People began to
pirate them too, right?
Pirate them, yes. Yeah. Samuel Roth, right? You mentioned this on the podcast. Yeah. So Roth earns, like, he gets rich. Can you imagine this, right? He gets rich off pirating a literary novel. Can you imagine? Right. Can you imagine what it would take to get people interested in even looking at a literary novel, much less buying a bootleg copy?
Yeah, you can't even get rich if you own a bookstore selling.
No.
There's no money to be made in that racket anymore. Yeah.
Early 20th century is a completely different world now.
Oh my gosh, man. Mm-hmm. And this is like I realize, right, that this is the centennial too for Ulysses. Yeah. We're talking about exactly 100 years ago.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, he was on his 140th birthday. It was the centenary on February 2nd, right? Or February 1st?
February 2nd. That's February right. 2nd.
Yeah. And sort of kind of a big deal. And we kind of put that episode out, and I wasn't even really thinking about it being 100 years coming up. And, it was just sort of something we wanted to do. And then it seemed like Twitter was alive with Joyce stuff. But then again, it's so strange to be on the internet now, because now to me it seems like, well, everybody's talking about Joyce, but I'm sure if I got on, my neighbor's Twitter account, there's Joyce is not to be mentioned anywhere. But so what, 100 years has passed. We still have Joyce. We still have Ulysses. We still have Finnegan's Wake. Aaron, you're talking about your students sort of picking it up, teaching it to undergrads, which I find interesting.
Yep.
Oof.
Do they like it?
No, they don't like it, but they don't like it, but they enjoy having read it the way people like in, the trenches of World War I came out on the other side and like, yeah, we really went through it and we bonded and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. So they enjoyed the slog after it was over, and they felt like I've heard like they felt a sense of like, oh yeah, I did something. I read this really hard book. So it's weird, right? Because on one hand, they didn't enjoy it and they wanted to complain, but then they realized they took a class, they enrolled in an elective called James Joyce's Ulysses. So,
right. They did. It's on you.
It's on you, man.
I have to let the vampire in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I took a Joyce class as an undergraduate, and I did this because, I was already a Joyce reader, but it was Dubliners and Portrait at the time were the ones I read. And I made one attempt to read Ulysses, and I wasn't able to get all the way through. It was just too challenging. And I took the class, and honestly, finishing that Molly Bloom soliloquy at the end, sitting in the depths of the college library, is probably one of the most memorable reading experiences I've ever had. Just getting to the that end of it. And even though I did enjoy the book, admittedly, one of the great, pleasures of reading this book is the fact that you're able to do it. The difficulty is part of the experience.
That's right.
Yeah. And you can't, and you do realize, I think, in the difficulty of reading it is you do have to work for it. But if you try to take the attitude that, I'm not going to let a sentence pass on misunderstood or ununderstood, you will never get through it, right? So there's an element of kind of picking your battles. You don't want to just let the whole thing go in one ear and out the other, but you could spend your whole life reading it.
Yeah, that's like a skill that you have to develop, is the tolerance of holding some of these things in your head without going, I don't really know what's going on yet, but the picture's going to get gradually clearer as I go back over this stuff. And a lot of people don't like that, but I think that people, need to get more ambitious as readers, not just as writers.
Yeah. No, I think that's true. I know it's one of a handful of books that's helped me with that sort of negative capability kind of thing, where I'm like more comfortable with just not with ambiguity and not really understanding exactly what's going on. It's helpful overall, because Ulysses feels more like the world I live in terms of being on the internet, being immersed in a self-perpetuating algorithm of information. It feels like a little like Ulysses, just like going onto the internet.
There's a great essay, a piece of literary criticism, which also happens to be useful and accurate, which is a rare achievement for a work of literary criticism.
Oh, sure.
By Joseph Frank, called Spatial Form and Modern Fiction. It's probably online somewhere. It's often anthologized. And it has a really useful thing to say about Ulysses and the novels influenced by Ulysses. And Frank says you can't really read Ulysses. You can only reread Ulysses, right?
Ooh,
so
I like
the
that.
first time you read it, Joyce will reverse the order of narrative cues. So as opposed to the way a way more conventional fiction writer like myself approaches it, or even a more experimental fiction writer like Brad approaches novel writing, you still, in something like House of Sleep, you prepare the reader for a narrative move or introducing a character or an object, a prop. Joyce does it the opposite way. He shows you the character, the prop comes in, Bloom will reference something in his head, and then later on, maybe 20 pages later, you will have context for this. Right? And gives us the sense of, readers often the sense of a swimming in this bafflement of information, some of which is familiar to you, some of which is obscure. When you reread Ulysses, you realize, oh my gosh, that's the first time that the soap actually comes up. Oh, that's the first reference to Blazes Boylan. Oh, that's the first reference to Rudy before we've been explained who Bloom's dead child is.
Yeah,
right? So
and then a first read, it can just be a wash of stuff that you don't
know what
yeah.
Rudy is. Rudy,
right.
I mean, you don't know what all this stuff is. And a more conventional writer like myself would structure that in such a way that you're giving the breadcrumbs before you give the appetizer, before you give the entree. But Frank, in a really helpful way, talks about what Joyce does, why Joyce does what he does, and the effect that produces on the reader. That's a great, great essay if you're interested in approaching this book in a new mindset and kind of looking behind the curtain of Joyce's technique. Spatial Form in Modern Fiction, Joseph Frank.
Okay. Yeah, no, I will certainly check that out.
Allow me to interject here. This talk has reminded me of something that Gurdjieff said about his own writing. And Gurdjieff, of course, we've done on another episode of Art of Darkness, artofdarkpod.com. Gurdjieff advised, and of course, Joyce was supremely superior as a writer to Gurdjieff. It's not even a question. But Gurdjieff did say that his work was meant to be read 3 times. And here's what he said. Once, as one is mechanized to read books and newspapers.
Ooh,
wow.
Right. Feed it into the machine of your brain.
Yes.
Yeah.
Put it into the machine of the brain. 2, as though reading aloud to another. And 3, to fathom the gist. And I think that's probably not a bad way to approach Joyce.
Yeah.
Fathom the gist sounds like a Joycean phrase already.
It really does. It really does. Yeah.
Gather your fist and fathom your gist. Yeah.
Yeah. 100%.
Yeah.
So back to real quick. I don't want to give a non-answer to Brad's question.
No,
what is Ulysses still relevant? I think it's relevant. Why it's relevant right now is for both Joyce's formal innovations and the fact that fiction writers have not allowed the literary establishment and the publishing apparatus to forget, okay, these techniques that Faulkner used to great effect, these techniques that all these fiction writers, Cormac McCarthy, for instance, used to great effect, came from this one book, Ulysses. And we are in his debt. I mean, 1925, Mrs. Dalloway, Virginia Woolf had read Ulysses and been grossed out by it. She didn't like the body stuff, right? She didn't like Bloom on the toilet. She was offended by it. And Eliot argued with her. And he said, no, this is a great book. You need to give this another go. So she gave it another go. She still didn't like it, but she appreciated the stream of consciousness technique. She comes back at Eliot and says, okay, that's not the way. I like what Joyce is doing in some ways. That's not the way the human mind works. And Eliot said, how does the human mind work? And she thought, And then she wrote Mrs. Dalloway to show how she believed the human mind works, which is what a genius does when encountering a great work of art. Yeah. You wrestle with it.
Right.
You wrestle with it, right? Woolf wrestled with this thing, and she decided, no, I don't like what he does, but I'm also a genius, and here's how you do it. And she creates a masterpiece in her own right, a much more accessible masterpiece. But Mrs. Dalloway is a fantastic book.
It's top shelf. They're on the same shelf, and it's the top one for sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And it is interesting. I do love this thing that's going on in modernism of like, we're trying to, because even now I pay attention to a fair amount of the science on consciousness, at kind of a pop sci level. And it's constantly about, well, you can't prove or disprove anything. We can't learn anything about other people's consciousnesses, right? And so it's this thing that's outside of the reach of science. But you've got 100 years ago, you've got James Joyce and Virginia Woolf, two geniuses sorting it out amongst themselves, and nary a test tube or a microscope to be found. And yet, I think a lot of ground made in trying to understand what it is to be conscious in a real way. It's just way messier than anybody who's doing consciousness studies is sort of going to be willing to accept, I think.
At the very least, you have an accurate portrait of James Joyce's mind.
Right.
And
Right.
It is an eccentric mind, without a doubt.
Yeah.
But it's also a mind that contains a vast amount of literature and philosophy.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, the amount of reading he must have done to come up with any of that. Aaron, there's this in doing a little bit of research today, The Guardian reprinted their review of Ulysses when it came out.
Oh, wow.
In 1922. And I'm just going to read the last paragraph because it kind of ties into what you were talking about a little bit. So this is from The Guardian. I don't know. They didn't have the name of the actual author, so I don't know if it was like one of those from the editorial board kind of things. But this is the very end of the review, and it's a glowing review. There are comic and sublime contrasts in Ulysses. The irrelevance and irreverence of the attitude of mankind before the great facts are remorselessly laid bare. Gross animality and subtle spirituality intermingle. Blasphemy and beauty, poetry and piggishness jostle each other. But on the whole, one becomes tired of beastliness always breaking in. There's one chapter devoted to the reverie of a woman, and her monologue interior is, I imagine, and am bound in all honesty to say, the vilest, according to ordinary standards, in all literature. And yet its very obscenity is somehow beautiful and wrings the soul to pity. Is that not high art? I cannot, however, believe that sex plays such a preponderant part in life as Mr. Joyce represents.
Wow.
He may aim at putting everything in, but he has, of course, like everybody else, selected carefully what he puts in. Has he not exaggerated the vulgarity and magnified the madness of mankind and the mysterious materiality of the universe?
Interesting.
And there's a lot going on in that last paragraph. And then I was reading that and I got to think about it because I was interested in this question of, like I asked you, Aaron, why is this relevant? Why is everybody excited about this? And I understand somewhat what it means to me, but I look at this and I think, man, is anybody working in the novel form right now that would elicit a paragraph like this in their review?
No.
I don't think there really is,
nope.
Right?
No.
It's like Ulysses kicked so many things apart and rebuilt so many things that we're all sort of in his wake a little bit.
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree. And I also think I believe the best fiction that's ever been written is being written right now. I would have said that stronger and stronger tone when both Dennis Johnson and Philip Roth were still alive a few years ago.
Yeah.
And Toni Morrison and Saul Bellow. So, I mean, like, I've said that more recently and it's been truer than it is now. However, no one has, since Ulysses, to my mind, written that book that quite explodes everything in the most artful of ways. Probably the closest I can think of is Nabokov's Lolita or Pale Fire, or Thomas Pynchon's Gravity's Rainbow, which is a very challenging book, and it has merits. It's not to my taste, but I recognize its achievement. But that they don't really touch what Ulysses did.
Yeah,
I should say.
Yeah, it seems like Gravity's Rainbow is maybe the closest. It's the thing that tried as much to be like Ulysses and got as close to succeeding as
right.
is sort of out there. But there's an element of everything. What is that? What do they say? There's a sort of a saying about the study of philosophy that it's all just footnotes to Plato anyway. Right. I feel like there's a little bit of that in Joyce too. It's all kind of footnotes to Joyce at this point.
Yeah, I reread it this summer. I'd been away from the book for a long time, and I reread it this summer, and I was delighted by chapters that I can remember being quite indifferent to. And I was not impressed or sometimes irritated by some of the more, I'll just say some of the chapters that struck me on this reading. I'm not saying they are this way. Struck me on this reading as being kind of gimmicky. Like I used to love the Cyclops chapter 12 at the pub with the citizen. And I loved all the pastiches of all these different literary voices. Ditto Oxen of the Sun does a similar thing. Cyclops does it with gigantism. And I remember being an undergrad and reading that, and of course struggling and, having 2 books of annotations and working through all this stuff. And then once I came out the other side, I probably felt a lot like my grad students, like, oh, I really went through something. And I also invested energy, right? That you don't want to think, oh, that was for nothing. You want to think I did something very hard, so that must have been significant.
Must have been worth it. Yeah.
I was bowled over this summer by Nestor, which is the 2nd chapter, and it's a very straightforward chapter by the book's standards, in which Stephen tries to teach a class to partially unruly private school students.
Oh yeah, that class, that chapter is a masterpiece of reasonably straightforward writing.
I thought it was fantastic. I read for the first time the Little Review Ulysses, so the Ulysses as it first appeared in the magazine The Little Review, and serialized, right?
Right.
And what is amazing to me is that, it's like a compressed trellis of the chapters of Ulysses appear almost unchanged in the Little Review, except they're truncated, right? And so Joyce didn't go in, for the most part, and overhaul the entire chapter.
Oh, he added stuff.
But he added like little fragments bit by bit by bit. And it was that process of accretion that created this behemoth. Joyce wrote, this is insane to me, Joyce wrote 1/5 of Ulysses on the galleys of the novel manuscript. So they sent him to galleys. If you see any typos, Jim, do circle those. He wrote, right?
In the margins, in between the lines. Yeah.
I mean, can you imagine what what your editor would do to you? What a publisher would do?
Right. Yeah, that's not going to fly. Well, and this is the thing that suggests to me that Ulysses isn't even Ulysses and Finnegan's Wake. You could follow me here for a second. They're not even done yet. They just froze framed James Joyce's process at a certain point and put that on paper. Right, they're still sort of going. If James Joyce was alive, they would still be occurring. Right,
there would be new additions.
Yeah,
there's a cool little passage in Anthony Burgess's RE-JOYCE book, which I recommend to anybody as a really accessible general introduction to Joyce. Anybody could read that book. It's not and yet there's some good criticism and scholarship in it too. But in the part where he's talking about Finnegan's Wake, he actually does reproduce iterations of sentences in how Joyce developed Finnegan's Wake, from the simplest to each, where he's layering on ideas and associations with the words, and the words start to become more blurry and sort of packed in and with different things and sort of ambiguous, what all the associations of all the words were. And you get this idea, and it does grow like you were saying, like a vine on a trellis. And you get the idea that it could have just kept going like that. And so there is this weird sense of something that's in the process of developing a real organic quality to his work.
Right. Yeah, like you could. There's almost. I had just like a science fiction idea of training an algorithm to enact Joyce's process, and then just letting it run on the manuscript of Ulysses, right, forever.
I had this dream, right, where like all of my favorite films that I've purchased on iTunes, I go rewatch them and I find out that Joel and Ethan Coen or Martin Scorsese or whoever, right, has snuck in and added new scenes that I've never seen before, like, and updated the whole thing.
Right.
Like, I'm like, oh my gosh, that's the scene in Taxi Driver we never got to see. And it's not like old footage. Like, he's like written, and it's an evolving, growing thing. And I'm rewatching all my favorite movies, and they're new again, right? And so I wonder if Joyce, had lived to be 150 or whatever, would there be like, okay, the 12th edition of, Ulysses, the 51st edition of Finnegan's Wake.
Right. It's constantly new, at the syllable level, things being sort of added and taken away.
You could categorize modern fiction as there being two kinds of writers. There's the people who do their best to cut things out, and people who add things on, the maximalist and the minimalist. For my money, my two favorite writers of the modern era are Joyce and Borges, and those are the two ends of the spectrum right there. But yeah, like, if you're interested in the maximalist novel, another one to throw in there is Infinite Jest by David Foster Wallace. All those steps go back to Joyce. So yeah, for sure. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, was there something? This maybe sounds stupid, but now I'm thinking about it, I can't really think of an example. Are there big examples of maximalist novels pre-Joyce? I suppose there's Moby Dick. There's a lot of big books. There's a lot I'm actually reading one right now that I just realized is completely, path that leads up to Joyce, and that's Rabelais.
Okay, I was thinking about Rabelais, which I've never read, but I'm sort of glancingly familiar with.
Right in the middle of that now. It's a crazy book, and also, like, in parts just about as obscene as Ulysses too. So.
Oh, really? Okay. On this note, so the great Blauergeist, friend of the show and great Twitter follow, he had posted this snippet of an interview with Don DeLillo that I found fascinating. I think we can think about this for a minute, and then I want to talk about Vico. But okay, so in 1988, Libra had just come out. Most of us have probably read that, I think. It's
great book.
It's a great novel. Don DeLillo tells more about, in this interview with somebody named Curtis, I'm not sure who this is, but it doesn't really matter, about imagining the Warren Commission report as a novel by James Joyce. Okay. DeCurtis says, at one point, you described the Warren Commission report, which is 26 volumes long, as the novel that James Joyce might have written if he had moved to Iowa City and lived to be 100 years old.
And gotten red pilled.
Right.
Right.
Here's DeLillo. I asked myself what Joyce could possibly do after Finnegan's Wake, and this was the answer. It's an amazing document, the Warren Commission report. The first 15 volumes are devoted to testimony and the last 11 volumes to exhibits, and together we have a masterwork of trivia ranging from Jack Ruby's mother's dental records to photographs of knotted string. What was valuable to me most specifically was the testimony of dozens and dozens of people who talk not only about their connection to the assassination itself, but about their jobs, their marriage, their children. This testimony provided an extraordinary window on life in the 50s and 60s, and beyond that, gave me a sense of people's speech patterns, whether they were private detectives from New Orleans or railroad workers from Worth. I'm sure that without those 26 volumes, I would have written a very different novel than Libra, and probably a much less interesting one. Wow. So I just thought that was interesting, polling James Joyce into the future. And then I haven't read the Warren Commission report exactly, but I did read the 9/11 Commission report.
Brad, you're slipping.
Yeah, I'm slipping. Yeah, I haven't read it.
Can we just say it?
Greatest work of fiction in the 20th
been
century.
Compromised. Brad's been compromised.
I am devastated to learn this, Brad. But you were saying you read the 9/11 report.
Well, I did read the 9/11 Commission report, and it was. It didn't go into this depth because it's a single volume, but there is a strange flattening of a hugely significant event by reading this report. It's just pages on pages of processing, bureaucratic documentation. And you're like, wait, didn't a bunch of stuff blow up in the middle of this? Like, how is this?
Well,
we're going to get to that part.
The Warren Report tells us the same lesson as Ulysses. Like, it's really, writing is all about revision, because I read the first draft of the Warren Report. It says Kennedy was killed by a drunk driver. So, I mean, it's really all about how you unfold the tapestry.
And it ends with Oswald with his Mannlicher Carcano saying, "Yes, I will, yes." So
is that right?
Too soon, guys.
That's great. That's great. And his heart was going like mad.
Yeah. So okay. So I just think that's kind of interesting to think about. Joyce is this kind of maximalist where it's like nothing is not worthy of attention, right? He was. I think there's something about seeing the reality is fractal in a way that everything is kind of represented in everything else. Now, in my mind, if Ulysses is still relevant, if Finnegan's Wake, we're going to talk about it more in the After Dark, if Finnegan's Wake is the Philosopher's Stone, Giambattista Vico's work, which is so influential on Joyce, has to also be relevant still, right? Somehow.
Yeah.
And Aldous, I know, and I don't mean to put you in a hot seat exactly here, because I've been leafing through the New Science, but I know you've kind of read a bit of it. Can you give us like a 30,000 foot view about Vico and the New Science?
Sure.
Yeah.
And I've heard the whole thing.
Okay.
It's been a while, and I'm actually on the verge of rereading it. To tease a little bit, it is for a future Forest of Symbols episode.
Excellent. Well,
I'm interested
we're waiting for
a particular element of it. So, and there's a lot going on, but what Joyce adapts is essentially Vico's cycle, right? And Vico kind of inaugurates a resurgence of cyclical theorists of history, and later you get Spengler and Arnold Toynbee. But Vico is interesting because historically he's situated right at this point of early modernity before the disciplines have kind of congealed, where you've got sociology and economics and history and all these things, but those didn't quite exist in the same way, those disciplines. And so he's kind of doing all this stuff, and mythology is in there and stuff. But he lays out a pattern, which he calls a universal history, a universal ideal history that civilizations tend to go through, that involve a age of gods, or a religious theocratic age, an age of heroes, an age of men, which is an age of popular democracy, and then it returns. And what he calls the ricorso. And so Joyce adapts this, and you get the So Finnegan's Wake begins with the ricorso, right?
Okay.
And a commodius vicus of recirculation is right in the very first sentence there, right? And so he actually, if you believe, many critics, and I think Joseph Campbell started this in The Skeleton Key, where Vico has 3 stages. Joyce essentially makes it 4, and the 4th is he takes the recurso and makes like a kind of a sort of dissolving and returning stage there. But what's interesting to me is that each of those stages involves a change in the rhetorical styles and the styles of language, where the earliest phase of history has essentially, I believe he calls it a hieroglyphic form of language, where the words are things, right? And then we move to metaphor and metonymy, and then finally to irony in the final stage. And so,
which is what we're in now.
Yeah, absolutely. We are.
Yeah.
We maybe even be in a kind of ricorso. I mean, that
I agree.
The word
agree.
return is a very popular word right now.
That's true. Yeah. There is a clamoring for, can you just make things mean things again? Yeah.
Return to wood.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
I want hard wood.
Yep.
We exist in the Vikian thunderclap right now. I firmly believe this. This is
interesting.
in the Vico and his cosmography and his cosmology, the Ricorso is sort of like Ragnarok, right? It completely destroys so something new can flourish, because it's like, I can't say it better than Aldous said. It's this. Well, it's cyclic, but it's not a cycle like. It's not a cycle. I'm trying to get like a pillar, right? If you were to look from the top down, you would see a circle, but if you look from the side, you would see a funnel.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, right. So you have, as Aldous just said, right? Theocracy, aristocracy, democracy, Ricorso. But then in the next circling, the time speeds up, and you go tighter in on the funnel, and then you have theocracy, aristocracy, democracy, Ricorso, and then
it's happening like very rapidly,
more and more and more rapidly, because it's a funnel, it's a drain, right? And that's the Vikian thing that's really always struck me, that it's hopeful in a sense because there's repetition. It is it's not hopeful in the sense that that things are happening more and more quickly, and soon there'll be a straight line. And what I fear with our present cultural moment is things are happening so rapidly that we have theocracy, aristocracy, democracy, and Ricorso all at once.
Yeah, they're happening.
All things all at once.
The cycle's so fast that they're basically on top of each other. Yeah.
Idiocracy.
Idiocracy.
Yes, idiocracy. Yeah, it's
noise.
Like,
noiseocracy.
Yeah.
Vico go burr, right?
Yeah. Yeah. See this.
Well, and this is Nietzsche's Twilight of the Gods too. Correct?
That's right.
Twilight of the Idols. Yeah.
Yep.
I think this is actually really well articulated fairly recently by there's this great documentary about Alan Moore, the comic book artist, who's a brilliant guy, and he's talking about how our culture is turning into steam, essentially. And this sort of lines up with some things Terence McKenna was talking about in terms of the what is it called? Anyway, I can't remember. The term will come back to me. But what he was basically saying is we're processing so much information now that, in the span of a day, humanity will generate as much information as maybe it used to take us 1,000 years to generate, just in terms of raw data. And that process speeds up things up to the point that we're completely destabilized. And he describes this as turning into a culture of steam, where basically the perception is that nothing is actually true or ascertainable, or nothing can be pinned down long enough to actually understand it before things have changed already. And it's the sense of it is that reality itself is falling apart, right?
Terrifying.
Yeah,
it's terrifying.
Right.
It's also what literary critics call postmodernism. I mean, that's
right. Yeah,
you kind of gave a definition of postmodernism.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And I think and it's interesting. So Vico is at least articulating the pattern of this back in the when was the New Science written, in the 1600s or the 1500s?
1700s.
1700s.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Did I get that wrong?
Okay. Early 1700s.
Okay.
I think.
Yeah. Which is it might as well be a million years ago at this point. It feels like. So that's really interesting. And so it's funny that you wonder now if there's going to be something of a Vico resurgence. Like, is this going to start? Because these thinkers of old periodically kind of come back into fashion as their ideas resonate with a moment, and so it makes you kind of wonder: is the new science gonna start making sense to people here pretty soon?
I think so.
Maybe the next Forest of Symbols episode is going to kick off that revival.
Well, once there's And quite possibly, but you know, as it comes, there's a sense of an ending, you know, of an age, and then people do start to get interested again in these kind of thinkers, and I think Vico, and I know there's more of an interest in someone like Spangler too.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of conversation about him right now. Well, I think the one thing, and not to get too far off track on Joyce, but I mean, I think the one thing that's happened in this last, honestly, just a couple of years is, I think there's a growing disappointment or disillusionment with science and technology. We sort of the 90s was like we were gonna solve every conceivable problem with science and technology, and now it's like, well, it doesn't seem like that quite works. We can solve we can solve a lot of problems with it, but it doesn't sort of answer the question ultimately somehow.
Well, this is something that the left, the new left, the born out of the 1968 protests in France and in America, used to firmly believe in. Postmodernism, post-structuralism posited that there could no longer be a totality like modernism, and that the attempt of creating a modernist totality led to the terror, led to Robespierre and Hitler and the Holocaust, and they were very frightened of that kind of gesture toward creating a totality, and that science could be perverted by authoritarians to create Auschwitz.
Sure. Why not?
Right. And that was, and to a critic like Francois Lyotard, that's the logical extension of modernism. It's not the way I think about it, but to Lyotard, I mean, believes that. Jürgen Habermas, to some degree, agrees with parts of this, that this is the danger of modernism, and a critique of reason, rationality, science, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. These used to be core values, and it seems like, you know, in the Ricorso, it's all up for grabs.
Well, I mean, and as much as Auschwitz and all the rest of it too, World War I just completely opened a chasm to hell. Yeah, and it was technology and then this old aristocratic order, this old order of the kingdoms of Europe kind of having its death throes. I don't think we can possibly begin to imagine what it must have been like to have been born in 1890 in Europe and to live through the World War I and then World War II. I can't even imagine.
Yeah,
it was totally apocalyptic.
Absolutely.
We dwell in the
right?
Yeah, it's World War I.
Yeah.
Well, you guys did, done a couple episodes on Kafka. Kafka is actually like, he really has the like early 20th century pessimism, things kind of dissolving into fragments and meaning, escaping behind layers and layers and layers of authority. But, it's kind of, that reminds me of how unique Joyce's version of modernism is in a way, because of how almost completely untouched he is by that kind of post-World War I pessimism. I mean, I could be wrong, but I don't think that it is.
Yeah, I think
you're right.
I think you're totally right. And I sometimes wonder, to what extent is that an Irish perspective to have? Because I've read before, and I'm a person with some Irish lineage. I've read before that commonly what's thought of as being part of the Irish temperament is laughing in the face of death. And you kind of wonder if there is, what Joyce is doing is a little bit of a different reaction to the same forces that maybe Kafka was seeing. And it's just to sort of cackle at it a little bit. It's just to poke fun at it a little bit, have a laugh, and have a dance and have a couple drinks. You got to do
your Joycean spider dance.
Spider dance.
Yeah. Well, we can't forget that there were many folks in Ireland in 1916 who were perfectly. They thought the idea of a bunch of Englishmen being machine gunned down by Germans was a really cool thing. It's fine. It's like what's for what's for dinner?
The enemy of my enemy is my friend. Yeah,
yeah,
right?
man. Yeah, they were they saw themselves, many, as a colonized people. Joyce said we're colonized by two different powers, the Church of Rome and by the British, right? So
that's a good point.
Yeah, the Irish perspective. I mean, also, like, just interject a thing on race, since you bring up the Irish. I also have the Irish in me.
All right, that's a plurality here in this group. So.
I took a lot of courses when I was doing my master's from a brilliant modernist scholar named Elizabeth Grubgeld, and she taught both Irish modernism and she taught Harlem Renaissance stuff. And she would bring in these what do you call them? Racist characters, propaganda photos, or drawings, I should say. And the Irish were, in the 19th century and to the 20th century, were caricatured as these simian creatures. I mean, they were drawn, the Irish were drawn as though they were apes and all this stuff, right? I mean, there were these really racist depictions. And she would point out how these are the same horrific depictions that you see in Jim Crow, that you see in the U.S., like almost the same exact cartoonish, caricaturish racism, right? And so a lot of the stuff that's happening in Harlem Renaissance is happening, and I mean, that Langston Hughes and all these folks are doing, these great writers, is happening with these folks on the other side of the Atlantic, in Dublin and the Irish Renaissance, right? So I think that we see the Irish as white people now, but in the 19th century, I mean, just in America, it was Irish need not apply. It was subhuman. They were treated as subhuman. So I think that, Joyce takes race seriously in that respect. And that's a piece of all this, I think.
Right. Well, and this is, I mean, part of why correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, this is part of why he identified so much with the Jewish people, right?
I think so.
Yeah, because it was a group of people that had been sort of oppressed since Bible times, and right, and so his people's more recent sort of oppression could kind of metaphorically fit in with that. And I think he partially identified with people of Jewish descent because he felt like he was in the same situation, just on a different, different scrap of land, basically.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that was kind of a common comparison among like Irish nationalist types as well. You hear it discussed in the Aeolus, the chapter in Ulysses where they're in the newspaper office. That parallel gets discussed quite a bit.
With Parnell, right? They're talking about Parnell being betrayed and all of that. Yeah.
Yeah. One thing I kind of wanted to touch on was I wanted to touch a little bit on this, the centenary sort of celebrations, right? So I was kind of reading around, like what is going on with the centenary celebrations, and there's definitely some cool stuff happening. There was a symposium on Sylvia Beach, who, without Sylvia Beach, we wouldn't have Ulysses probably, or it would, might be moldering on a shelf somewhere in an archive. And there's been, a number of, everybody's publishing an article or an essay on Joyce right now, which is great. But I was interested in the actual centenary sort of celebration, and I'm trying to find this thing by Frank McCourt. Professor McCourt I'm reading from his BBC article. I'm trying to see where this Professor McCourt, where he's from exactly. Because he had a kind of an interesting point. So he talks about Professor McCourt argues that Joyce has been turned into a consumer product, in many ways canceling out, airbrushing out the fact that so much of what he writes about Ireland is negative. I don't see anything wrong with people getting dressed up, says Professor McCourt, the author of an upcoming book. Here we go. The author of an upcoming book called Consuming Joyce, 100 Years of Ulysses in Ireland. I don't see anything wrong with people getting dressed up, but let's not turn Joyce into something that's harmless. His book has that cutting edge. You have to find a balance. The book shouldn't be a vehicle for nostalgia of this magical Dublin of the past where everyone went around in an Edwardian costume and enjoyed themselves. Joyce depicts a very different and quite a poor and inward-looking Dublin. Ireland is only learning how to cope with this legacy now. Ulysses, wasn't really in the public domain. It was in the domain of academics and elite. This Ulysses wasn't part of our canon, says Darina Gallagher, director of the James Joyce Center in Dublin. We didn't really know the characters in the novel. We're only getting to know it now, getting to explore it and find legacy in it, which is kind of fascinating. So
that is fascinating.
Yeah, so it kind of makes me think. It's like, I don't want to be like a gatekeeper, or I'm certainly not in a position to be a gatekeeper, or kind of a hipster about this and say that, somebody who's out having some drinks on Bloomsday or on the Centenary you don't really get it, man. Like, I don't want to take that position, right? Because, people should take any opportunity you can to have fun, I guess.
No doubt.
Point. But at the same time, it's like you've got this erudite, brilliant work of literature, and in the Centenary, does it get lost if you just turn it into a costume party, right?
Yeah, there's a little bit of this. I feel this around Fitzgerald and around Gatsby. I think Gatsby,
when you play up, we're going to have a Gatsby party.
I think it's just ridiculous. I'm from North Dakota. I am Gatsby. People don't know. Can't even name the state that character's from.
Right.
They maybe know that Fitz was from St. Paul. Read Winter Dreams from Fitzgerald, and you want to talk about the Catholicism in America and the Irish in America and all of this and all of these stories. They turn it into a little costume party, which kind of takes the teeth out of it. I find it to be a little bit revolting. Gatsby's a story of crime.
Right.
It's a crime story. Yeah, Aldous.
Yeah, none of the Gatsby parties include someone getting run over by a car, do they?
No, they don't.
Yeah.
And you don't sacrifice your friends to the traffic. Yeah.
Right. Nobody talks about growing up in a sod house in the Dakotas and escaping and moving east, and what that move east means to Joy or to Fitzgerald and all the rest. Yeah, we'll get on to that Fitzgerald episode is going to be a banger.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that. But I think now, and I don't know, I'm not in Dublin, so I don't know what the sort of centenary celebrations look like, if there are any. But yeah, it does make me think about how sometimes this stuff gets commodified, and in the process of getting commodified gets kind of watered down, and then you end up losing the point of what that work was created for, right? And it just becomes and I think there's a good point that McCord's making there. It's like it becomes sort of like, maybe it's the book of Ireland, and then you kind of get into it, and James Joyce had a lot of really bad stuff to say about the Irish people and the Irish culture, right? He had a certain amount of pride at the same time, but you can't dismiss all of that and pretend it's this sort of iconic representation of that country in a celebratory way.
Well, I think the harshest book on the Irish is Dubliners.
Yeah.
You go back and read Dubliners, and it's just in a subtle way. It's like
hardcore. Yeah, it is brutal. It absolutely is brutal. Yeah. I think Joyce's. I'm not even a pop psychologist, but this is abjection, right? Like this is like classic ambivalence. So you hate the thing and you love the thing. Like you hate the thing, but you are the thing. Joyce, I think it's a more personal view of him. I think he really resented, like down to his like DNA, that he was poor, that he was so poor, and he grew up always fighting for every scrap. This is a man who, once he had a family, he lived in threadbare tuxedos. Like he aspired to the life of an aristocrat in exactly the way that people who grow up in extreme poverty do. Like, money meant some sort of like protection from the nightmare of that returning. Stephen says to his mother, the first chapter of Ulysses, history is a nightmare from which I'm trying to awake. Like, and Joyce tried to wake up from that his entire life.
Yeah. Yeah.
Would you rather be intelligent and poor, or rich and stupid?
I mean, I'm like Napoleon. Give me a man who's lucky. Give me a man who's lucky, right?
It's a bit of a rhetorical question, but
no comment.
Yeah.
I think maybe in my next life, I'm going to try rich and stupid.
Rich and stupid. I've had enough.
Give that a go, right?
Yeah, really. Aldous, you were going to say.
Well, I think I read this on the last episode, but I want to read it again. Just a short quote from Portrait, but that Stephen says that I think is really relevant to what we're talking about here. He says, "When the soul of a man is born in this country, there are nets flung at it to hold it back from flight. You talk to me of nationality, language, religion. I shall try to fly by those nets."
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And he did, right? And how many people didn't? And then again,
you could make the argument that America has the opposite problem, right? We're sort of thrust into this just cacophony, right? So
because America was in a way a country founded on that idea. Everybody's trying to fly past the nets, and so it's just kind of like founded on chaos in a certain sense.
Yeah, right. There's a sort of a you're right, Kevin. It's the inverse. It's like, well, you can do anything you want, and then it's like, well, how did you
can be anybody you want. Well, I guess I might end up overdosing on fentanyl in the gutter then. Like what?
It's a little confusing.
You're on your own, kid.
I can do anything? Yeah. How do you choose this next step?
Then? I can understand that reaction coming from the crystallization and the sort of oppressiveness of the old world, though. I understand that for sure. Yeah, that's a great quote, Aldous. Really germane.
Can I buttress the quote from Portrait with a counter quote from Finnegan's Wake?
Yeah, let's put these all in combat with each other.
This is from a chapter that is sort of known colloquially among Wake scholars, of which I'm not one, but I've read the book several times. The chapter is called Shem the Penman. It's the 7th chapter of the first book. And in it, Joyce travesties the suffering young Irish intellectual artist type. Shem is it's not so much a character as he is a principle in Finnegan's Wake. It is the artist principle. It is the weaker brother principle. It is the scribe principle. And here it is. Shem was a sham and a low sham, and his lowness creeped out first via foodstuffs. So low was he that he preferred Gibson's tea-time salmon tinned, as inexpensive as pleasing, to the plumpest roe-heavy lax or the friskiest par or smolt troutlet that ever was gaffed between Leixlip and Island Bridge. And many was the time he repeated in his botulism that no jungle-grown pineapple ever smacked like the whoppers you shook out of Ananias's cans, fine later in Gladstone's corner house, England. None of your inch-thick, blue-blooded balaclava fried at belief steaks, or juice-jelly legs of the Grex's molten mutton, or greasily gristly grunter's gupons, or slice upon slab of luscious goose bosom, with lump after load of plum pudding stuffing all aswim in a swamp of bog oak gravy for that Greek-hearted you'd. Roast biff of old Zealand, he could not touch it. See what happens when your stomatophage merman takes his fancy to our vegetarian swan? He even ran away with Hun's self and became a far soonerite, saying he would far sooner muddle through the hash of lentils in Europe than meddle with Ireland's split little pea.
Whew. Dang, that's incredible. Now, for a second there, I forgot whether we were doing Joyce or we were still in last night's MF Doom episode. So for like a sentence there.
That does sound like MF Doom. You could put that to a Doom beat and kind of try to do something with it. Really?
Yeah, just a couple more rhyming, a little bit more rhymey, but the same general. That was incredible, Aaron.
Thank you.
I could only see Finnegan's Wake makes me feel stupid. I'm gonna say it right now. It makes me feel kind of dumb. Most books I can get something out of, and Finnegan's Wake is tricky. But that was a great passage. So where does that passage sit in the book roughly?
It is in my new Penguin edition is page 170, and that's out of 628 pages.
Okay, so you're talking
Finnegan's Wake is in 4 books, right? And so this is toward the end of the first book, the first kind of section.
Yeah. Oh, it's so intense.
That's an amazing passage. Yeah, I'm going back to this. The whole description of Shem, the pen man.
Yeah,
worth looking at.
That's so cool. Yeah, that's so cool.
That's an oft anthologized passage from the Wake because even though it presents difficulties, that's way more accessible even than the first few paragraphs that Aldous read on the podcast earlier.
From Finnegan's
Wake, right? This mostly obeys the rules of English grammar, syntax.
Sure. Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah. 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 I didn't hear a lot of neologisms in there. There were a couple, but Yeah. Yeah.
Definitely fewer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, that's really interesting.
Well, and I know, Brad, that you had done a little research for this episode with McKenna.
I did. Yeah.
I don't know. Did you want to bring that up? Because when the fellows were talking about time and time speeding up, that made me think of McKenna and his whole concept of novelty and time wave zero.
Yeah,
the McKenna episode we do is going to be so great. But go ahead.
Time wave zero was actually the concept I was sort of grasping for, talking about the Vico and the cycles of time. We'll talk a little bit more about the McKenna stuff in the After Dark, because we're going to try to answer the question of could you use Finnegan's Wake to reseed the universe as James Joyce intended it to be. So we're going to talk a little bit about that after.
And how do people get access to the After Dark episode?
Patreon.com/art.
Kevin is teaching me how to be a promotional machine.
Broadcasting.
Yeah, that's right. Patreon.com/Art of Dark Pod. And every episode we've got 20 to 30 minutes bonus content. It's usually worth it. We go a little bit more off the cuff. I guess maybe we sort of start moving ourselves towards the end of the main episode. I feel like we've covered a lot of interesting territory. But Aaron, you said that you had listened to the previous Joyce episode, which you can listen to at artofdarkpod.com, where we and joined by Aldous Asterion did an in-depth investigation and biography and exploration of Joyce. Aaron, was there anything in there that you felt like you had wished you could have been there to interrupt us?
I thought it was a great episode,
and
there was nothing I disagreed with. I thought, yep.
Good.
The only thing I thought is the only thing I ever think with any discussion of Joyce, which, this is every discussion of Joyce, right? Where I think, well, that's true, but also X. Well, that's true, but also Y. It just keeps going. If the writing of Finnegan's Wake wouldn't have ever stopped, why wouldn't the reading of Finnegan's Wake and the discussion of Joyce ever stop? Right? I do think. So, in addition to Vico's a pillar, especially in Finnegan's Wake, but also a treatise by another Italian heretic, this one burned at the stake, named Giordano Bruno, who wrote a really another crazy book called Expulsion of a Triumphant Beast that I think is another, I don't want to say a key to understanding Joyce because I don't think those exist, but it is a foundational text to getting at his obsessions.
Yeah.
So the we mentioned the Baconian cycle as being like one of the master ideas adopted for Finnegan's Wake. The idea that he found in Bruno of the unity of opposites is another extremely important one that he adapts there.
Exactly.
And it should be noted that Joyce actually said that he didn't necessarily believe Vico's idea. It's just that it fueled his imagination so much that he had to use it.
And that makes sense. And that's similar to his relationship. I would say that's similar to his relationship to Christianity, in which once it resonated and made sense to him sort of metaphorically, he was on board with it. And does that mean you actually believe, quote unquote, believe it or not? I don't know that mattered all that much to Joyce. It was sort of it was like, not that it was true, but did it rhyme, kind of, right?
That's a big thing. He will, as he progresses from Portrait or from Dubliners to The Wake, he will more and more sacrifice sense for sound.
Yeah. And I think he did that sort of cosmologically as well. Right? Is it true or not? Nothing's true. Everything's true. Does it like aesthetically appeal, which is its own kind of truth.
It's a fundamentally Irish way of looking at things too, right? And people criticize. I mean, the Ellman biography used to be this. I mean, it was not only at one time the end-all be-all of Joyce biographies. It was the end-all be-all of literary biographies. Like this was the model, and then you kind of dig into some of his research now and you realize, Ellman kind of bought into the Irish notion of fact, which is anything anyone says at any time.
It's a fact.
Right? He went over to Dublin and he sniffed around and all these people said, oh yeah, I know Jimmy. Right? And then they started like unfolding this tale and he's like, oh, okay, yeah.
Must be true.
Yeah.
Well, see, but maybe that is exactly the perspective that is required to survive the moment we're having now. The as we're approaching the Ricorso, maybe that's what you actually need. Is sort of like you kind of believe and don't believe everything that you hear at the same time, right? It's all just it's all what. You kind of just take what you need, leave what you don't, and you kind of acknowledge nobody actually knows anything.
The interesting thing to me is that like the Joyce of the novels and the short stories is a highbrow artist interested in art for art's sake and art as religion and all that kind of stuff. You look at the letters and you're looking at a different man. You're looking at a man who believes in one thing. Do you have a few quid you could lend me? Do you have any money I could borrow? I mean, the letters are a laundry list of people he wrote asking for money. Oh, yeah. He's a very practical guy. I need how many ever pounds to make it till this date. And I have this money coming from this person and this money coming from that person. I can repay you on this date. I mean, it is as fastidious as any accountant.
Yeah.
So that's a different side of old Jim that is not often spoken of. It's like, this is a guy who was obsessed with money and having enough.
Yeah. And I think also gets lost, and it's part and parcel what you just said. Once he started to get a little bit of recognition and acknowledgement, he was ambitious in terms of getting his stuff out there, getting promoted, legal battles over the pirated versions of Ulysses and all of these things in a way that you wouldn't expect necessarily. He seems like a guy who's like, I'm just going to write my book and I don't care what happens. But
right.
But when you get down to it, it was very, very concerned with what the reviews were saying, very defensive.
Absolutely.
When somebody criticized something he was saying.
Oh gosh.
You know, talking about suing. At one point, I think in the Ellman biography, he considers suing somebody in Japan over a pirated copy. And it's just like, that's not gonna just let it go, man. You know. So yeah, he was kind of concerned, very much concerned at the level of lucre, for sure. Yeah.
Well, he didn't have a straight gig after he was teaching,
Trieste, right?
And after he was doing that teaching, and he hated it, despised it, right?
Mm-hmm.
After he got done with that, he never had a straight gig then. So he lived off, basically patronage,
right,
until the 1930s when Random House, or Knopf, I should say, actually gave him some freaking money for the U.S. edition.
Yeah. And if, by the way, if anybody wants to do a recorso or return to the fine art of patronage,
patreon.com/artofdarkpod. And do join our Telegram too. We're spending more time on there. We're chatting. We're getting feedback directly, and we invite that. That's easy.
Yeah.
Go to artofdarkpod.com for all of these links. We really appreciate it. We are going to pivot now into the After Dark episode. We're going to do another 20 or 30 minutes with these gentlemen. We do typically end every episode with a question. Are we ready for that one, Brad?
I'm ready for it. Let's see what. Did we already do this in the previous Joyce episode, though?
Did we? I don't recall. That's all right. Let's ask both the fellows, maybe starting with Aaron, because he wasn't on the first episode. Aaron, if Joyce was around now, what do you think he would be doing?
I think he only knew how to write, and I think he only knew how to write and drink and sing and play piano, play guitar, and I think he would be writing and doing those things. I think he would probably be more financially successful because he would have some of the larger artist grants. I think he would totally exploit the Joyce industry that grew up after his death.
Yeah.
And he'd be making appearances. He'd be giving talks. And I think he would have welcomed and flourished in the spotlight because I think he really enjoyed the attention.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're right about that.
Aldous, what do you think?
Well, I do recall now that I actually did answer this one on the other one, so I'll just give my slightly opposing view because I can totally see him, like fitting into the role of like James Joyce and the industry around that, and like playing that up. And yeah, he was like the total writer, but there's a possibility that he had an interest in different media and in new media. He started a theater in Dublin. He starts writing about television and radio and Finnegan's Wake. And part of me thinks that he could have been, not just online, but like really online.
Yeah.
What kind of stuff that he's doing in Finnegan's Wake and the experiments with language, he might possibly could have even been like a programmer of some kind.
It's true.
I mean, whatever he would have done, it would have been literary, but he could have even gone into these other areas. The only thing I think that would have held him back is the eyesight thing.
Yeah. Did any of you guys, this is totally off topic, but this makes me feel like this is what Joyce would have done. Did anybody read the comic Transmetropolitan? Am I familiar with this?
No.
Yeah.
I've heard of it.
It's great. So it's Transmetropolitan. It's basically this Hunter S. Thompson type character who's living in the future, a sort of cyberpunk future, goes by the name Spider Jerusalem. He's this journalist. But the scene that I've just thought of, and I think this is what Joyce would do, is he wakes up in the morning, does a bunch of, put a chemical concoction. He injects some kind of performance-enhancing drug into his eye, and then he sits down in front of like 30 screens, and he just says, "Give me information." And then it just like sort of blasts him with like, dozens of channels of news and documentaries and live footage and all of these things. And I can imagine Joyce kind of swimming in that to some degree. And I think he would love the internet. I think
mind-boggling to imagine Joyce with, even just Wikipedia, much less, everything that's going on with.
Yeah, the kind of hyperlinked mega text that he could come up with would be pretty fascinating.
Yeah,
what if Joyce grew up in our time, and we go back and we steal this genius from the past, we plant him as a teenager, and he grows up, and you think, oh, he's going to write the great novel of this time, and he just podcasts and has an OnlyFans and has a Twitter account.
This is. I mean, I think this is worth thinking about. Is what does the internet do to a brain like Joyce or somebody along those lines? Can they do the thing that they, can they write Finnegan's Wake if they've got a laptop in front of them and they're checking Twitter every 20 minutes?
Well, and the reality is somebody may be doing it right now, but we might not even recognize it. There might be some Twitter account that 100 years from now, everybody says this was it. This
was the one. Yeah.
We don't know. Do you know? So, but maybe, I don't know. Maybe that's a little too optimistic. In any case, we're going to talk about Finnegan's Wake on After Dark and whether or not you could reconstruct the entirety of the universe from Finnegan's Wake. I want to let the fellas get their plugs in. So, Aldous, where can people find you?
Wherever you get podcasts, you can look up The Forest of Symbols. I'm on Spotify. I do have a Patreon, symbolpod.patreon.com. So check that out. Aldous Asterion on Twitter.
Yes. And Aaron, where can people find you?
I'm American Gwyn, GWYN on Twitter and Instagram both. And some Welsh teenager has taken just Aaron Gwyn, so I'm American Gwyn. That's how it is.
American Gwyn.
American Gwyn is pretty based. I like it.
Thank you.
Stay with it, man.
And Aaron, when do you know about the shortlist for that award?
So the shortlist for the award comes out in March, and then the award is in April, and it is, and Joyce would love this, it is 100,000 Irish pounds.
Nice. Hey, look, wow. Okay, well, we're pulling for you. A very fine
Thank
novel.
you.
All God's Children. Everybody should look it up. And if you want 30 more minutes of this blarney, artofdarkpod.com, patreon.com/artofdarkpod. That was RE-JOYCE. I think we're calling that episode. Does that work? That sounds
I like
awesome.
it. It's cheesy,
Absolutely.
but also awesome.
I like it.
It insists upon itself, Kevin.
It is a little corny.
You can't not call it RE-JOYCE. What are you going to do?
I like
you have
it.
to.
No.
Yeah, good. All right. It gets the approval.
Okay.
All right, fellas. We'll talk to you on the After Dark. Okay.